Hello, everyone. This is Charles Laughlin from the Local Search Association, and welcome to today's webinar, Scoring the Digital Marketing Stack, brought to you by the Local Search Association and Boostability. So before we get into the content of today's webinar, I want to walk through a few housekeeping items. And first, I want to make you aware that all webinars are recorded and made available for replay on the lsa.org website. You can see here how to navigate to the page where you can find the archive of webinars. And this webinar, today's webinar, will be available within 48 hours on this page. And then everyone who attends the webinar or registers for the webinar will also receive a link directing them to the replay. And also, while we don't provide a copy of the slides through this link, we are happy to provide those to you on a request basis, and we'll provide contact details at the end, or you can simply put your name in the questions and then request a copy of the deck through that. So anyway, that's that. We hope you go back and check out our past webinars, and most of them are still quite relevant and still interesting. So we hope you explore that. Next, I want to let you know about a couple of upcoming LSA events. The first is Place, New York at the Grand Hyatt coming up in September, on September 16th. And then on November 7th is the Tech Adoption Summit. And this is my particular area of interest for the Local Search Association. We have a program within the LSA called the Tech Adoption Index, which is a program designed to sort of measure small business adoption of cloud technology and sort of understand the business issues emerging around that as many businesses shift to software as a service as their business model to go to market in the SMB space. And we're building some intelligence and some research around that program. And actually, happy to say Boostability is one of our sponsors for that. And then also, we recently launched a podcast for the Tech Adoption Index called Above the Cloud. You can find this on SoundCloud if you search under Tech Adoption Index, also iTunes, Google Play, and also it's on the techadoptionindex.com website. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the meat of the program today. Essentially what we're going to talk about today is a survey that Boostability and LSA conducted together recently. And the target audience was digital agencies, and we'll get into a little bit of methodology and objectives in a moment. But first, let's introduce my fellow speaker, Kelly Shelton, who's VP of Marketing at Boostability. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Charlie. Great to be with you today.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for working with us on this really interesting project. So, first of all, before we mention the survey, I also want to mention that there's a companion white paper that we're putting the finishing touches on. Should be available in the next couple of weeks. We'll send out a notice about that. So again, you can get the deck on request, but you may simply want to wait for the white paper, which will contain all the data, plus some more context around what other data says about the same questions, and also some input from companies offering these services, and some more narrative around it, and some more context and color. We're going to sort of handle the gist of the survey results today. So just a little more about what we did with this survey. It was conducted online through May, June. We closed the survey late in June, I believe. And the objectives were pretty clear cut. We wanted to understand, how those selling the small business or the digital marketing stack to small businesses sort of rated the performance of the various components to sort of give us some insight into what the priorities were, what they felt was performing, what they felt wasn't performing, and so on. Kelly, do you want to give us a little more background on sort of why Boostability was particularly interested in this?
Yeah, over the years, we've worked with our partners, and are constantly asking them questions and getting feedback from them. And one of the things that continue to come up in the conversation is, well, how does what you offer compare to other digital services, and what other digital services are out there, and what's compatible, what works well together, how much does it cost, or is it in demand? And so we got a lot of feedback, and actually from that feedback, we've introduced a couple new products because of what partners are finding in the marketplace. So we put together some research, did some analysis, and came up with a presentation that I gave a few months back, and the response was really, really positive. So in talking to Charles, we thought this would be something that's worth digging into a little bit further, find out, do a survey, do some more research, and really understand the landscape from a reseller perspective, and see what's compatible, what demand is, and that's what we went out to do, and it's been really a good project for us to understand all the different services that are available and how they play well together, and et cetera.
Right. And it's really, I mean, this was really taking the temperature of resellers on how they perceive these various products. And what we did is we rated the stack based on a series of criteria. And what we did is we asked each respondent, and we had about 102 mostly digital agency respondents or companies related that, all sell these solutions to small businesses. And we asked them to rate that on a series of criteria that included, demand, how easy it is to sell, essentially, because how much demand is being expressed by their small business customers. What kind of margin does it deliver to them? In other words, do they feel like they're making money selling it, or do they perceive that they could make money from selling it? How sticky is it? How is there a lot of churn of this product, or once it's in, it's in? Get a sense of that. ROI that's delivered to the small business customer. I think we want to be clear about that. What is their perception on how it performs for the small business in terms of return on investment? And then ease of integration, which we'll get into a little more about what we mean by that, but essentially is, how easily can you bring it on board, begin selling it, begin fulfilling it, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into a little more of each of these as we get into the results. But just quickly on sort of the sample, again, 102 respondents. This was by invitation from LSA and Boostability. We both sent out this invitation to our list of agencies. We had a few other sort of types of businesses, but they're all basically companies that are in a position to offer digital marketing services to their small business customers. Most were horizontally focused, though we had a small subset of the sample that had a vertical focus, and most indicated they had a focus on small or very small businesses. There was a smaller subset that emphasized larger businesses, but this is largely a SMB or very small business focused reseller audience. And most were relatively small in terms of their sales footprint. The majority had 5 or fewer reps or individuals directly touching small businesses for sales purposes. So this is a small agency, small business sample in large measure. So just before we get into the details, a little more on how we think you should use this information, or how we feel this information can be useful to you. Now, first of all, again, if you're a local media seller and you're looking to evaluate elements of the stack that you want to offer or emphasize, or which ones you think, as Kelly noted before, work well together and so on, this could be one set of data that will help you make those decisions. I think it should be a multitude of inputs to that decision-making process, but we think this can be a useful input. Again, if you're offering things currently, you may have some at least curiosity, if not active interest in how your perception compares with the perception of others in terms of how these products are performing. And if yours is in divergence with others, that may beg some questions, or you may find some validation in the data. Kelly, would you add anything to those first two?
No, I think that sums it up. I mean, this is really to provide that insight into, especially if you've never offered digital marketing services. This can be really helpful if you're offering traditional services like print or radio, TV, Yellow Pages, whatever that other service may be. This can be very, very helpful for you as well.
Right. It's for someone who has starting out, offering services. From those who already are offering services may want to add more. Again, may want to have some sense of validation of how what they're doing is performing against how others see their products performing. And the last point is, I think for those who are providing these services, I mean, there's going to be some good news and bad news for everybody here, at least in terms of the results of the survey. I think that's to be expected. But there may be some insights coming out of this to sort of help you understand how your product is perceived, and there may be some ideas on how to message or tweak how you how you have your conversations with partners or potential partners based on the perceptions you're seeing here. You may have an opportunity to ask them some questions based on what you learned today. So we hope it's helpful to everyone. Some quick observations. And the first point, Kelly, why don't you jump in there and just kind of talk about what you found before and how, broadly, how this maps to what you had discovered previously. And then we'll get into it with each of the components later, but maybe kind of touch on that here.
Yeah, in our research, we had talked to a lot of partners, a lot of resellers, and been in a lot of discussions with potential partners, and compiled and did some in-depth research where we interviewed different partners and different agencies and companies that offer different services, and put together a pretty good analysis of apple-to-apple comparison of how does XYZ digital service compare to ABC digital service. And we had some good internal data that we put together, and that matched up pretty well with the data that we found in this survey that LSA did. And then there were some differences, and so that I thought it was great to see kind of where there were some similarities and where there were some differences, and we'll talk a little bit about what was consistent and what wasn't as consistent with what our own internal survey, which prompted again us to dig deeper into this topic, because it is something that we felt would be valuable for anyone offering digital services.
Right. And, not just spoiler alert, but yeah, SEO and websites came out on top just in terms of overall ratings. There's a pretty big spread, and we'll go share in a minute which services we looked at. These kind of jumped out as the leading offerings among digital agencies, but, they're the most widely offered. And we'll get into a little more later about why we think they rated as highly as they did. There was some divergence from Boostability's own analysis prior to doing this survey, but not a whole lot. I mean, and I think one theory is that they're sort of closest to that, that core SMB initial desire, which is to create a presence and then drive traffic to that presence, that being sort of foundational function for a small business getting activated digitally. So it sort of stands to reason that those are sort of top of the heap. But others sort of integrate and connect to those sort of core functions. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then there's some that had lower scores across the board. And we'll get into those a little more. And I think we had some theories as to why some of those occurred, and some of it is performance, I'm sure, and some of it is perception, and some of those perceptions are based on lack of familiarity in some cases. Again, we'll examine these by product set, and then also, some products probably aren't a great fit for very small businesses, and many of the people responding to our survey are focused on the very small business space, and there may be some factor there as well. So there's some external and some outlying factors that are going to impact some of these results. That's why we sort of emphasize that this is a survey of the perception of agencies about how these products perform. Again, the white paper will kind of unpeel that a little more and kind of line it up with a lot more color on actual performance and other sources of data and so on. So this gives you the perception of the agencies, and that's important to know. Okay, so let's talk about what's in the stack. Just gives you a quick list of the components that we looked at. We won't go into each of these now in detail because we're going to talk about each quite a bit, but these are the ones that are included, and we think this is a pretty comprehensive list of what most agencies or local media sellers are offering. At least there's certainly other things we could have put on this list, but this I think is a pretty good fundamental core set of product offerings. And then this slide, just bear with me for a second. I wanted to help you understand how we organize the information and how we ask the questions. So what we did is for each product that we just listed in the previous slide, we had the respondents rank them according to these criteria on the left, which we noted earlier: demand, margin, stickiness, ROI, and integration. And then here's how we asked each of the questions. We tried to be as clear as we could be. And then what we did is we gave them a range of possible answers, range, as you can see on the right, for example, demand. It could be very weak demand all the way up to very strong demand, and so on and so forth. And what we decided, rather than just take an average response, we wanted to measure the enthusiastic response, those who enthusiastically indicated strong or very strong, or indicated high or very high, or, and so on and so forth. So we picked the top 2 boxes, added those responses as a percentage of that response, and then ranked them by product according to their top 2 response. So that's what you'll see in the coming slides. So which ones had that enthusiastic strong response, and then we force rank them 1 to 10 based on that. And so that's kind of how we ended up ranking. And then we also do an average ranking based on average score to give an overall rank for the entire data set across all criteria. So that's what you're going to see over the next few slides. So you get a sense of how these of the spread of responses, and then sort of which products do well by which criteria. So we'll start with demand. And again, by demand, Kelly, we want to make sure we're really clear about what we mean by demand, and that's simply the perception of the agency for, how popular this product is, how easy is it to sell. Would you add anything to that? I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, that's pretty clear, and this was fairly consistent across the board. The small businesses are looking for SEO and social and reviews and PPC. Those are what are pretty big drivers in the digital marketing space right now. And so that's what this is what is a small business out there searching for, wanting, thinking that they need, finding valuable. And so this list illustrates that.
Nothing here jumps out as very different from your previous analysis, really.
No, I think the demand for social was high as well in our previous analysis. But yeah, this lines up fairly well. I think there was websites was a little higher in what we had done, but everything else is pretty consistent here.
Yeah, I'd say websites scored very well in most of the other categories. I think maybe one reason, I mean, it's not a bad score, but it's there may be some. I think there may be some factor of maturity in some of these lower scores, either maturity or very new. It's sort of both. I mean, if you look at content marketing, for example, or is a it's not that new generally, but for small businesses it's pretty new. Whereas websites are pretty mature, and a lot of businesses already have a website, so there may be a little softening of demand from that, perhaps. But we'll get into that more with each of the categories. Okay, so let's move on to the next one is margin. Again, this is what makes money for the agency, essentially, right, Kelly? And again, these are, I think, again, you look at PPC and display having the lowest margin. I think it's sort of generally understood that those are, challenging from a margin perspective because there's often a media, you're buying media and so basically reselling it to the agent, to the small business. So there's those are tougher from a margin perspective. So it's consistent that they would be at the lower end. Others like email, I think there may be some lack of understanding of email from a margin perspective, or lack of adoption. So there may be some lack of maybe some perception versus reality with a few of these. But in general, Kelly, I mean, what would you say about this in terms of how it lines up with your understanding?
Yeah, I think this was also very consistent. Websites, because of the stickiness and the maintenance fees and things that are charged, that's where you see a good margin for websites. Reviews and listings were also ranked high. I think social media is again high in demand, but it's one from a maturity standpoint. There's still some question as how to integrate this, how to sell this, and while SMBs want social, there's still some work to be done as far as how to best deliver social media and make money doing it. But everything else that we see here is also very consistent with our initial assessment.
Okay. All right. Stickiness. Again, this one, I would have, I think websites, it jumps out as sort of it's the classic sticky product. This relatively difficult. The classic sticky product is it performs well, and it's also central to the business, and there's a real either a monetary or just a hassle cost to switching, and sort of websites is sort of the classic sticky product in that respect. What would you say about the others?
I think, one of the things we found is from an SEO standpoint is a lot of the thinking out there, the perception that was out there is that SEO wasn't a very high margin or sticky product. And this kind of, and our other assessment tells a different story, that there are good margins in SEO and there can be stickiness when done right. And so I think that's something that before we even started to do this research, we were fighting a perception that wasn't the case. And so this was nice for us to see that these numbers, that it does show that it's sticky and that there is margin there for the reseller. As far as the other services, again, I think the stickiness factor is there a recurring fee? And usually when there's a recurring fee, or if it's a one-time fee, that I think plays into the stickiness of this as well.
All righty. Okay, and then next one is ROI, and this is ROI for, again, we want to make sure we're clear that it's not ROI for the seller, for the reseller, it's the ROI for the small business. And so this one is probably, I think when we were talking before, Kelly, we were saying that, this one may have the biggest spread between reality and perception, in the sense that we're asking the agency to assess the ROI of the product from its customer standpoint. So it's the perception of the small business passed along to the perception of the agency. So there's often a gap between true ROI and perceived ROI, and it's often a result of, sometimes it's the result of just what's the most prominent, and also what has the most shortest feedback loop in terms of results, can often lead to an ROI perception. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, on that note.
I think the small businesses are looking for new customers. They're looking for leads. They're looking for more business. And so the services that tend to drive new leads, drive traffic, from a small business perspective, that's typically, what they find most valuable. Is
Right.
this going to grow my business? Am I going to have opportunity to sell more product? And so I think that this does, most of these that rank high here are lead gen type, or they assist in the sale. They help bring in new business.
Right.
And so they're perceived to be a little better return on investment.
Right. Whether that analysis is actually the case in terms of cost and benefit, there may be some divergence here, but yeah, I think you're right. It's like they're making the phone ring or whatever, the register ring. That's always going to stand out, as opposed to something that maybe has a longer tail effect or is more about branding and so on. So
or retention, or
right,
engagement.
Right. Okay. Now, integration. Which products integrate? This is probably the one where, frankly, there is the least distribution, or the narrowest distribution of results. But talk about what we mean by integration, and maybe talk about why you think that these are so bunched together. Some do stand out, but
Yeah, when we talk about integration, we talk about how easy is this service to adopt and to add to your product set. How difficult it is to resell it. Is there a lot of internal trainings and hirings and et cetera that are needed? And those are the primary factors. How does it integrate with your current stack? How well does it play with each other, with each of these products? How easy it is to adopt and sell? What are the barriers to entry into offering these services? That's essentially what we mean by integration.
Right. And based on your prior analysis, do you see anything here where you think, surprised they're not really, maybe not higher or lower, but let's ask it this way: which ones really stood out as easy or hard to integrate in your previous research? Might be helpful to sort of share a little.
Sure. Display was a little easier to integrate, and what we found, SEO was a little harder to integrate. There's more that an agency or a partner would have to do in order to offer SEO. It's a little more complex than just adding display ads or even emails and content. So PPC is a little harder to integrate as well, but For the most part, this is fairly consistent. There wasn't a lot of variance in our initial assessment as well, but those are things that stuck out as differences.
Okay, all right. So let's look at a summary of the rankings, and then we're going to talk about each of the individual products a little bit before we turn to questions. So, so this is again summarizing what the agencies think and summarizing the ranking. So across the from left to right, where we go from demand through ROI, these rankings are based on where they force ranked within that sort of top 2 enthusiasm score that we were showing over the past several slides. And then the average is the average score across all categories. So while the average score creates a ranking that's fairly consistent with who's on top for a lot of these top 2 box scores, there's a little bit of some difference based on just averaging it out. Certain things move to the top and to the bottom, et cetera. And we kind of somewhat judgment call on how to rank them high, medium, low. We decided top 3 was a fair grouping for high. Bottom 2 is a fair grouping for low. And I think a lot of these, because there's a lot of a lot of the scores are very close. I think that sort of give them a benefit of the doubt and rank a lot of them as medium. So and we think it's a fair distribution based on how the scores landed. But it gives you an idea of the ranking, and it gives you an idea of some of the sort of a single view of where some certain products were strong and certain products were not as strong based on the agency perception. So now let's take a turn and talk about each of these. And so talk a little bit about some of the score, but also just kind of some thoughts we have on where this product sort of sits within the marketing stack right now. The content marketing is an interesting one. There are some folks out there certainly selling content marketing as a product onto itself. It scored low on stickiness. It it was average-ish for everything else. A couple of observations we had, and jump in, Kelly, but that maybe this isn't a very small business category, and this is probably not necessarily in every category. In other words, we were kind of joking around that content marketing for plumbers may have limited utility. So there's some limitations to its applicability. But what do you think on why where this sits right now in the stack?
Yeah, well, this is also one of those products or services that is a part of a good social media product and a part of a good SEO product, and and so content marketing is going to be included in some of the other services that are a part of the stack. And as a standalone, a small business may need a blog every month, or there's some things that content marketing probably isn't really necessary for a very small business. I mean, how much content marketing does a plumber need, or does a landscaper need? And so that's, I think, is a factor as well. But it is a very valuable and essential part of other services as a standalone. For a small business, it may not be as attractive as a standalone, but it's definitely part of the other services. Right.
So I think probably a lot of these agencies are offering this, but they don't really think of themselves as offering it because it's baked into the cake of another service. So, all right. So moving on, display. It's a lot of red. Sorry, display. But I think there's some thinking around why this is probably not performing as well. It's not necessarily a big small business category necessarily. It's kind of a mature product in a lot of ways, and it's sort of the those are a couple of thoughts. What else would you? And also, why don't you talk about how this your previous analysis looked at display and how it compares to this, and then some thoughts on why you think it ranked the way it did.
Yeah, similar results. I think a few years ago, display might have ranked higher and better in both of the survey and our assessment. But as other products have matured and and changed and evolved and become more of hot ticket items for small businesses, display has kind of faded. And I think because of that, I think there's a place for display, but it's again one of those products that's nice to be bundled with something, or nice to kind of as a value add. But as a standalone, it has challenges in meeting demands, especially of small businesses, and helping a small business to understand the value of it, and track the performance is another issue. So those are some things that we found with display and in both of these surveys.
All right. Okay. So let's move along to email marketing. So here we've got, kind of ranked in the middle, mostly low for demand. There's a few thoughts on this. I mean, I think one of the issues is that this is not a heavily offered. I mean, it's often part of a marketing automation, platform. But standalone email marketing, a lot of agencies aren't necessarily offering it, and a lot of small businesses self-service with email marketing. So there may be some lack of familiarity going on with this. I don't know what your thoughts are. And this is fairly consistent, though, with your results, right?
It is. I think we did have a higher demand. I think small businesses do see the value of having marketing to their customer base via email, but it's again not one of those hot ticket items, or it's kind of a something that's not seen as a necessarily a new business driver, more of a customer service type tool for the small business. But it is something that we did see more demand for this in our assessment. But I think you've covered the main topics and main discoveries on this service.
Okay. Again, we'll have more exploration of sort of what other data says about these products and services in the white paper. So there'll be certainly more color on all of these. Okay, so listings management. Again, this one ranked pretty high, and this is a very competitive category. This is sort of becoming table stakes for the stack, would you say?
Yeah, I think every service from social to website to SEO, this is a nice complementing service, or even a core part of those services. You really need to have your name, address, phone number listed in all the prominent profiles across the web. And this is something that I think small businesses understand the need and value of it. It's a core fundamental online presence service. So these scores are consistent with what we found and what we're finding and what we see day to day. But it also complements a lot of the other services, and is like content marketing is part of the other services already built in.
Right. Okay, so PayPerClick's an interesting one. Again, it's been around a while. There's always been some issues about whether this is a product that works for very small businesses. I think there's been some innovation around that in the past few years, where a lot of companies are saying that the PayPerClick is effective at smaller budget rate levels than used to be believed. So there's some progress there, but that's always been sort of one of the governing factors is budget size. But it's did pretty well, certainly on ROI integration. I think ROI makes sense because, again, like we were talking about earlier, you push out PayPerClick ads, and you get results back in a fairly short order. So it's a very tangible product, and I think that's probably explains the ROI number better than anything. What else would you add about this?
Yeah, PayPerClick is also one of those services that does provide that instant results, or very similar to traditional advertising. You run a radio ad or you run a spot, and here you get a response, and PayPerClick does that. And it's also a great complement to other services that take a little longer to get results, but that are valuable, like SEO and a website and social media and content marketing. Some of these things that take a little while to get traction, but that are essential. And so and also the evolution of the market, I think, has changed PayPerClick and how it's perceived and the value of it, but it's still a really important product and service that has its place, that I think will continue to have its place in the digital marketing stack, and is a solid service to offer.
Now, it's always had the low margin reputation. but it's always had that reputation of being that thing that helps you sell other products. So it fits well in the stack, even if they're not making a lot of money off of it. I'm sure there's folks who will argue with us about that margin number, but nonetheless, it seems to be a pretty consistent response that is lower margin. But it delivers that. It delivers a lot of, even though stickiness is medium here, it seems to help retain customers as part of a broader offering. I think that's always been part of its reputation as well. So, okay, reviews, getting into this one really jumped out on this survey. How did it compare to what you found before? Is this more a stronger result than what you came up with earlier?
It is a little stronger than what we came up with, but I'm not surprised by it. The buying process has changed, and reviews matter now more than they ever have, and the consumers are empowered to go online and research, and they make decisions based on what they find. So I'm not surprised that this is performing that these results are what happened in the survey. Because of kind of what we're seeing, and this is another one that again complements a lot of what you do. Even pay-per-click and SEO and social media. If you're driving traffic to your site, well, they're naturally going to research your business and research what you do. So reviews is an essential part of any digital marketing stack as well.
Right. Okay, let's keep going. So here we go, SEO, Kelly. Now, it came out pretty well, fair to say. And just talk about, I mean, obviously you tried to pressure test this because it's your own product, and you wanted to see where the weak points were. And so talk about how this, and SEO as well as anyone, and if you're going to be perfectly as candid and fair-minded as you can be, how does this rank with reality?
Well, we've done a lot of research on this, obviously, and we've studied this, and we've tried to gather as much data as we can to understand its strengths and its weaknesses, and the pros and the cons. And today it is a in-demand, highly sought-after service. That's something that we feel very confident that all the data shows, and it's not something that that we're inventing or making up to make it look better. It is consistent. It's a great product and service that businesses want. So that's very consistent. There are challenges with SEO. It's hard to train a new sales force on how to sell SEO. That's a big barrier. There's some integration and some adoption issues that come along with offering SEO. The margins, though, are really good. You can have a high margin product. The reseller can earn good margins with this. And it does deliver ROI when a small business does find themselves on the first page of Google or higher in the rankings. They find that very valuable, and it is something that does require kind of ongoing maintenance and work to keep and maintain your ranking. So the stickiness is good as well. Right. And it's one of those services that does complement everything else. It works really well with pay-per-click and works really well with social, and it's one of those core things that every business does need. And that's evident in the results of this survey. Yeah,
but the other piece of conventional wisdom about SEO is that it takes a long time to work. Talk about that a little, and how I guess maybe I would have thought the ROI numbers would be a little softer, just because we're talking about a perception survey here, and because SEO is a patient game.
Yeah, I think the maturity of the marketplace of SEO, I think more and more businesses are understanding that. A few years ago, businesses did expect immediate results, and I think now the messaging has been consistent across SEO companies that this is going to take time. It takes 3 to 6 months to start seeing and feeling results and to get to the first page, and so it is a longer play. And I think, again, that's just because the messaging has matured and more and more businesses are aware of how it works. I think there's more education around SEO, and that's helped businesses get that if I'm going to invest in this, I've got to be in it for the long term to get the optimal results that I'm looking for.
Right. Okay. All right. Moving on to the last few. Social media. I think the demand. I think this is pretty consistent with what you found, and I think it's pretty consistent with an understanding of the market. Again, demand is high, SEO is hot. Social is hot. ish. I mean, it's been hot for a while, so I guess you're probably not smoking hot, but nonetheless, it's still very top of mind. I think everyone realizes they need to have some sort of activity on social. Maybe as you were saying earlier, maybe the model hasn't quite been nailed down. I'm sure some would argue with that point, but overall, in terms of how small businesses should do social, still a work in progress. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair, and it is challenging to kind of help a small business owner see and recognize and understand the value of what does it mean to have a social presence, and what does it mean to have a following, and so some of those things still haven't quite. SEO went through the same phase where how do you explain the value, and how do you get a customer to be patient with results, right. And social media is another long-term play for small businesses that takes that consistency over time is what makes it really work for a small business. And right. Sometimes a small business owner doesn't have the patience to wait. But it is, I think there are services out there that are cracking the code and finding the right way to provide this service to a small business owner at budgets they can afford and deliver the value and results that they're looking for.
Right. Okay, let's get on to the last few here, in interest of time. So video is another one like display that kind of had a little bit of a tough rating, but I think there's some clear reasons for this. I think one, I think everyone would agree that for the right customer with the right video, it can really perform. I mean, it can really be a very powerful medium, and I know just personally, I know from B2B content, video is really powerful stuff. But I think for small businesses, there's some challenges. Fulfillment is very difficult. I think, for very small businesses, they may at least think that video is out of reach for them. I think there's been a lot of progress with more automated production processes and things like montage video that sort of take some of the friction out of it. But this is still, not a particularly easy product to sell or fulfill, or at least that's a perception. I'm not sure the reality is quite lined up with that. But what's your take on video, Kelly?
Yeah, video is another thing that is a nice enhancement to the other services. Like if you have a PayPerClick and you have a video you can show in SEO and social media, it's great. But so how much video do you need to produce? Is it one video? Right. What is it for? This hasn't matured enough yet as a standalone product to really take off yet in the SMB space, at least in my observation. But it is something that's powerful and effective, and I think how do you use it and what's the purpose of the video? Those are still some things that are being, I think, worked through from a standalone service to the small business marketplace.
Right. Okay. All righty. And one more, websites, which generally really strong. I mean, in terms of average rankings, I believe it was number 2, if I'm not mistaken. We had mainly partly because of the forced ranking. It was low on integration, but I think everyone had a fairly high integration score the way this survey was set up. So I wouldn't overinterpret that low ranking on integration. I mean, you would say that from an integration standpoint, it's not a particularly challenging product, correct? Or would you argue with that at all?
I would say the most challenging part of websites is the actual fulfillment and build. Right. If you're building the site for the customer, then that can be challenging. That can be challenging to scale. It can be challenging with a small business because of the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and so there's some challenges as far as what a small business wants and thinks they're going to get, and then what the website does and builds. So we find the most challenges in integration on the fulfillment and the content and the creation of the site that working with the small business owner to build that. Right.
But in terms of stickiness and margin, there's probably a few better, right? A few better.
Yeah, it's a core product and service that every small business needs, and it's one of those staples that I see continuing, not going away, and will always be a high sticky product.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's challenges with websites, I mean, given there's still small businesses that don't have websites, and there's going to be small businesses who don't believe they need a website. We did a report with Mono recently, sort of arguing if this local data hub concept is websites being a repository of all of your data, which is then distributed through various channels, social and so on. But I think the idea that you have an installed base of websites, then you get to the point where probably demand starts to soften, and then the challenge is sort of getting small businesses that have a suboptimal website to improve their website and so on. That may be a slightly harder sell than that first website, or maybe not. But maybe those are some of the challenges websites face. But in terms of being like still seen as the core of a SMB's digital presence, I don't think it's shaken much. I think it's still pretty solid in that respect. Anything else on websites?
No, I think we covered it.
I guess we'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Kelly, for working with us on this and for joining us today. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.